people are being ejected today, and the people aren't necessarily aware. And so as a result, I've just been encouraging everybody across the board to check with your state Department of Health and Human Services, whoever administers Medicaid in your state, to check on their status continually. Vital.
The U.S. Senate just passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And as we record our podcast today, it now sits in the House of Representatives. And despite the uncertainty of knowing what will and what won't be in the legislation, and true to our mission of making Decoding Retirement your first and last stop in your search for retirement planning and financial planning knowledge, we're going to talk about some of the provisions that will affect your wallet. And my guest today is Jae Oh. He's the author of Maximize Your Medicare and also an education fellow at the Alliance for Lifetime Income. Jae, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Jae, and it will be a pleasure to talk to you about the bill that now sits in the House of Representatives. Do you have a sense whether retirees need to worry about this bill affecting their Medicare ultimately?
I do not lose sleep over changes, for example, to the eligibility rules, meaning there doesn't seem to be any changes. For example, the rules of eligibility are the same the month you turn 65 years old. That said, I would say that enrolling correctly in a timely fashion, not overpaying, not underpaying, not having lapses in coverage, that entire process has become more complicated through time. I'm not overly concerned with the types of coverage that you would receive, et cetera, like that. That said, I can't say that everyone will be completely unaffected. No, I can't go that far. Just simply, we don't have enough information.
At the moment, we're told that about 16 million people will lose their health insurance, and that would have a direct consequence on their financial and personal well-being. What do we need to know? What's the actionable advice, as well as what we need to know about that?
For sure, Bob. And just to start, let me just say that your healthcare cost planning affects every person. That has to do with money that people use day to day, and then over the long run, irrespective of your age, wage level. When it comes to Medicaid, your first topic, the work requirement seems to be in pretty much agreed upon across the board. The question and the numbers that you're hearing of have to do with the fact that you have to verify your status on Medicaid, which is a very complicated topic. It was delayed. The entire process was delayed coming out of COVID, but that has restarted, and different states have pursued that different pace. Well, now, as a result of this new bill, appears that in addition to that, you must prove that you have worked 80 hours in some capacity. And then you get into the definitions of what that actually means in order to continue your Medicaid eligibility. So what was already complicated looks to become even more so.
Right. And then for folks for whom this might affect, what guidance do you have for them?
I have been on this for months on my Substack, which is jo.substack.com, which is for every person that is receiving financial assistance towards their healthcare cost planning topic, that to check with the source every month.
Yeah.
That as a result of the process that I stated a few moments ago, people are being ejected today, and the people aren't necessarily aware. And so as a result, I've just been encouraging everybody across the board to check with your state Department of Health and Human Services, whoever administers Medicaid in your state, to check on their status continually. Vital.
Yeah. There are many provisions that also affect Medicare in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and curious for what you think are the top line considerations for people. Just by way of background, I've been on the the Kaiser Family Foundation, now called KFF.org website, where they are tracking the bill, the House version, the Senate version, and have some commentary on it. And I highly recommend that people go there as well as to your Substack and other places to get information about this bill. But there's a number of provisions that affect Medicare. Tell us what we need to know about that.
For me, it is kind of related to Medicaid, which is something called MSP, Medicare Savings Program. This to me is the highlight, which is that there are people who are close to Medicaid eligibility. They are receiving some subsidy to pay perhaps for their Part B, perhaps for extra help towards prescription drug assistance. These programs and the eligibility, the verification looks to become more complicated. And as a result, you could drop off. Now, the reason that this is important, this is happening today in my home state of Michigan. Literally, I'm dealing with this situation today. That when your status changes, if it were to change, then your eligibility for certain Medicare Advantage plans, in this particular case called dual eligible, also changes. And so you can understand these are people who may be struggling financially. And now your status into these valuable Medicare Advantage dual eligible plans also under threat. So it's not only the verification of the savings plan itself, but also the ripple effects.
Right. I believe there might be some potential costs associated with Part B as a result of this bill. Is that correct?
I think that those are yet to be seen, meaning that right away, it doesn't seem to be changing necessarily. But the fact is that the funding of Part B does come in part from a discretionary line item. And if you have these balances, and I'm not an expert in, balancing the budget and things like that, it seems to be that money could be withdrawn from that discretionary amount into Part B. So again, Part A is a mandatorily funded number, but Part B is a discretionary number. And to the degree that the funding of that line item changes, it could affect Part B, the scope of services, the cost of premium, and all of the cost sharing details.
I believe there is some discussion around the Affordable Care Act, and some repercussions there. One of which I think, at least according to KFF, is that the marketplace insurers won't be able to set their premiums until the bill is finalized. And so obviously we're not in a position where people need to enroll just yet, per se. But tell us what we need to know about the ACA and the bill.
Well, difficult to predict. My crystal ball is malfunctioning today,
Yours, mine too. Yeah, mine's cracked beyond repair.
But I think what's right. I think what is safe to say is that the headlines from the carriers is fairly consistent, which is that healthcare utilization is higher than the carriers have anticipated. And that has led to cost, and we're not talking about stocks, et cetera, but we are seeing, and very consistently, that the carriers are reporting that the usage rate and the cost of that usage is higher than anticipated. Normally speaking, the setting of health insurance premiums annually is volatile to start. And now we've got this even before this big, beautiful bill. Whether or not that affects the enrollment is yet to be seen. It is fairly predictable that the number of enrollees declines. And this can challenge the carriers because they depend on the people who do not require health insurance, health care services to pay for those who do. That is the general structure of all insurance in the US, which is that the people who do not file claims ultimately are paying for those who require healthcare services. So to the degree that the total pool declines, could that make it even more challenging on top of what I just introduced? I think that is safe as far as a prediction goes.
Right.
Complicated.
Yeah. And some of the numbers around the number of people that may no longer be able to qualify for ACA is, I've read anywhere from 4 million to 8 million or so, give or take. Is that the number of people that could be affected by changes there?
Yes, I think if anything, that sounds too low. And it's a big number. And this is raising my concern for people who are not covered by their employer. They have to fend for themselves and choose an individual or a family plan using healthcare.gov or your state-specific health insurance portal. That there's no version of the new bill which includes the enhanced APTC, which is the advanced premium tax credit, which is actually the mechanism by which individuals and families have lower premiums, lower deductibles, lower out-of-pocket maximums. And without it, this is in effect inflationary, right? Because if you look at the KFF sites, and I've seen that portal, which is an excellent, fact reporter, if you will, that if you thought that the average adult, that the health insurance premium would be $500 a month higher, that now you got $6,000 and a married couple is $12,000 a year as far as a cost of living. Well, that by definition is inflation.
Yeah. Jay, we have to take a short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to Decoding Retirement. I'm speaking with Jae Oh. He's the author of Maximize Your Medicare. He's also an education fellow at the Alliance for Lifetime Income. Before the break, Jay, I said that I wanted to talk about the open enrollment season that will begin later this fall for employees who have employer-provided health insurance at work. Lots of changes that I think are coming, and people need to be very conscious of not just checking the box and signing up for the same old plan that they had the year before.
Yes, that's always the case, Bob, that as you may have heard or read, that, for example, the employers now are increasingly trying to help people in terms of their overall wellness under the umbrella of wellness. And still, employer-sponsored health insurance is the dominant source and almost sole source for those people who work at large employers, unless you met some very exceptional circumstance. That I always encourage people to fully understand what they are choosing, especially as people work beyond 65, because now you have Medicare, which is a viable alternative, a complicated one perhaps, but one where switching to Medicare may be best either from a coverage point of view or a cost point of view or both. So I don't think that this is going away as more and more people work beyond the age of 65. Last thing is that the employers very frequently in this day and age are including high deductible health plans, which include HSAs. And there are some clauses in the new bill and the different versions where the treatment of HSAs for people as they grow older, changes compared to where it is today. We will have to wait and see to see the exact details on that.
Yeah, there's so many moving parts to the HSA question in the bill that it's probably not worth putting a stake in the ground on any of these things because it could certainly, certainly change, I think. But I'm curious, when you mentioned HSAs, so many companies are now offering high deductible health plans. And my experience with HSAs is that they are not necessarily being used as they were once promoted, which would be as an IRA for your healthcare expenses in retirement. It seems like many of the folks, I think there's somewhere around 35 million or so employees who have an HSA, a high deductible health plan and HSA at work. And for the vast majority of them, they're spending the money that they put into the HSA on current medical expenses as opposed to saving the money for future medical expenses. What's your advice to folks who maybe, I don't know, I wouldn't say misusing HSAs, but maybe not thinking about the impact that they have given that they're a triple tax advantage account?
Well, let me first say that if you're using it for current expenses because you're facing it today, I don't really find a problem with that, right? Because that is, in effect, using a pre-tax dollar to pay for an X-ray, for example. But you need that, and it's important, and that seems, for me, on a personal level, private level, better than delaying going to the doctor to find out whether or not your arm is, in fact, needs a cast.
Right.
For me, I don't really have a problem with that. That said, the other advantages you discussed, generally speaking, are not utilized fully, as you predictably so. And some of that has to do with whether or not people are struggling financially. That can certainly be the case. There's another reason, though, which is that I'm not sure that people understand the full degree to which the funds in which HSA can be used, like legally used. The IRS has a very, very long list. For example, many people don't understand that Medicare Part B premium can actually be used from your HSA, making your Part B premium basically paid with pre-tax dollars. And other things like long-term care insurance. Certain long-term care insurance you have, depending on the contract, can be used. You can use your HSA funds for it. So these are just two simple examples that you may want to have contributions to HSA when you have not in the past.
Yeah. Jay, let's turn our attention to Medicare's annual election period, which begins October 15th. We're a ways away from that, but what do folks need to think about in advance of that period beginning?
Well, Bob, there's always a swirling amount of news and headlines of various sorts from every direction about Medicare Advantage. And if anything, the amount of crossfire has increased. So, as you know, large name, well-known carriers have all reported, and they have reported specifically on Medicare. That specifically on Medicare Advantage, the high usage rate that we discussed in the prior segment is specific to Medicare. And as a result, what has happened, and you can see it in everyone's reports so far, and it has been fairly systematic. It has not really been different from carrier to carrier, not really. That the question is whether or not you're going to have the same quality of packages of benefits. That is an open question. We don't know yet. I'll know on October 1st when I can first discuss that with people. I'm a practitioner in the matter. We have clients around the country on Medicare Advantage, something that is beneficial to them because it fits their situation, their location, whatever their circumstances are. That is not the problem. The question is what's the most fitting plan, best plan, air quotes best, that will change from situation to situation, location to location. And I think that will be even more important going forward, given the background facts, even if your health stayed exactly the same.
Yeah. As always, don't let inertia be the order of the day, right? It'll be incumbent upon you, perhaps even more so this year than in years past, to reevaluate your plan to make sure that it's the best one for you. I can see a world where, as you said, maybe services are fewer and costs may be higher at a minimum. So let's in the time remaining, Jay, I want to talk about the what some people have called the white collar recession, where if they are laid off or they expect to be laid off, they have the option of either going into a COBRA plan or maybe choosing ACA. And given the changes with ACA this year and maybe the enhanced advanced premium tax credits going away at year end, this makes the decision all the more difficult, does it not?
It's difficult to start. So COBRA itself can be code for very expensive, right? Because people are simply unaware of the full cost of health insurance, because the employer, especially at large employers, they have to pay for part of the premium, and depending on the employer, may be paying the dominant share. Well, under COBRA, the employee or ex-employee, the one who has lost coverage, is responsible. And so now you've got a situation where you have to put in the place to compare COBRA versus the ACA. So even in the best of times, that is complicated. So my practice, we're spending time talking to employers to say, your employee, you filed a WARN notice, which is mandated by your particular state, to say you're laying off X number of employees. And it's not really the responsibility or their job responsibility of HR of your human resources department to compare all of the different plans under the ACA. That's just simply not under their umbrella of work. So that leaves it to the consumer to do the comparing. So that's where we are today. And given what we discussed in the prior segment about APTC and whether or not that will go away, that you will have this extra complication of looking forward into next year. So, like you pointed out, very, very complicated.
Yeah. Jay, we're running out of time. I apologize. I want to thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. 23 minutes goes by like in the blink of an eye. But we'll have you come back in the fall when we get a better sense of what Medicare Advantage plans will be offering, what Part D plans look like, et cetera, because we do want to help people, as I mentioned, become the first and last stop in their search for knowledge. So I want to thank you for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Bob.
Pleasure. So that wraps up this episode of Decoding Retirement. We hope we provided you with some information to plan for or live better in retirement. If you've got questions about retirement, you can email me at yfpodcast@yahooinc.com, and we'll do our best to answer your question in a future episode. And remember, you can listen to Decoding Retirement on all your favorite podcast platforms.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.